Hi church family. Now I have something of a confession to make, and this probably won't come as a surprise to some people, but yes, I'm one of those people who never misses the opportunity to sit down and watch the Premier's daily COVID update. I know, a sucker for punishment, right? Well, last week, during one of those press conferences, Dr. Murray Wright, who is the New South Wales Chief Psychiatrist, was invited to speak. And he said something that really impacted me. He said that this present lockdown is, and I quote, probably the most sustained and serious stress that many of us are going to face in our lifetimes. Now, I thought at the time, wow, to be honest, that's not something I'd ever really considered. But then, of course, it dawned on me, it explains why mental health services are experiencing unprecedented levels of inquiries, why, for instance, Lifeline and calls to Lifeline are at all-time highs. So it really got me thinking, what can we do to help us go the distance during this sustained period of stress? How can we care for our mental health? But also, how can we care for our spiritual health? How do we continue to cultivate our life with God during lockdown? Are there certain practices or exercises, attitudes or ways of thinking that might not only sustain us over the next few months, but might actually even help us thrive in the midst of them? Well, I gathered up my questions and I turned to my great friend, Rob Allan, Dr. Rob Allan, just to see if perhaps he could offer us any advice about some of these things. Rob has multiple degrees in business and medicine, law, counselling, and was recently awarded a PhD in psychology. He's worked in management consulting, venture capital, corporate management, and now works as a psychologist. Rob is also a mature follower of Christ. And one of the things he's really passionate about is helping people consider how kind of choosing to live based on sources of identity other than our core identity in Christ can actually get in the way of experiencing the fruitful life that God intended for us. In fact, he's currently writing a couple of books on that very topic. All that is to say that Rob is well qualified to provide us with some practical tips, some, if you like, lockdown life hacks to help us care for our mental and our spiritual health in the midst of these difficult times. I sat down with Rob earlier this week, via Zoom of course, to talk through some of these things. Rob Allan, thanks for joining us today.
Hi Jamie, it's my pleasure.
I mentioned just then in my introduction that the New South Wales Chief Psychiatrist, Murray Wright, described this present lockdown as probably the most sustained and serious stress that many of us are going to face in our lifetimes. Now, it's true sometimes we're not necessarily aware that we are under stress. I wonder if you can tell us what are some of the basic signs to look out for that might actually suggest we're being mentally or emotionally affected by this lockdown?
Yes, yeah, sure. Perhaps before I even do that, let me first say, how it's important to realise that, that when our actual circumstances are different and when we're in a different sort of routine and maybe different financial kind of situation than we're used to being in, then it's very, very normal to have a whole set of different feelings and emotions and reactions emerge, and especially when we feel like, those changes that are happening are largely outside our control. So, there's no need to be overly alarmed about this, but it's just how we're wired. But it is, it is important that we're aware of it. So, what you say is quite correct. But to answer your question, there are many possible signs of lockdown stress or anxiety, and this may show differently for different people. Maybe it's sort of increased irritability, being shorter with our loved ones at home, or feeling more annoyed, with others over minor things, feeling overwhelmed. For some, it might be low moods, being more lethargic or flat or sad than usual. Difficulty focusing on and concentrating is another. Loneliness, of course, is a big one. The body can also, give us a lot of physical clues too. So a tightness in the shoulders, the chest or the jaw can be, signs of increased stress. Shortness of breath or racing heart can be signs of anxiety. A change in sleep patterns, can be signs that our minds are troubled and we have difficulty settling.
Yep.
And drinking more alcohol or eating more than normal, could be another sign that we're experiencing stress.
That's quite a checklist. Very helpful. I think I tick a few boxes there. Obviously, people are affected by this lockdown in different ways, and depending on your situation in life, your experience is likely to be different. That said, irrespective of whatever our circumstances are, what are some of the basic things that we can all do or build into our lives to help us look after our mental health in this time of now, from today, extended lockdown?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, one thing I'd say, firstly, there's a big connection. The research shows a big connection between sort of physical health and mental health. And, we know this is true of longer term chronic conditions, and it can also be true of sort of shorter term emotions as well. So when our physical routines change, our mental world can as well.
Okay. So can you drill down a little bit more into that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, for example, in lockdown, I've seen a lot of people drop off their physical exercise quite a lot. And this alone can be enough to make a lot of people feel very differently. Maybe a bit down, not sleeping as well, more anxious, even without knowing why or recognizing. So, definitely keep up the physical activity. Get out for a walk. Find new ways to exercise. In our house, we set up interval training circuits with different stations around different parts of the house, and every couple of days we do a circuit to music around there, and just keeps things.
You do a little demo of that right now for us? No, it's okay.
Maybe another time. But what a vitamin D deficiency is something that often a lot of people overlook. It's another one that's at risk in extended lockdown, and this might show up as muscle weakness or fatigue or depression or even weight gain. Doctors tell us that we need about 15 minutes a day of sunlight exposure on the equivalent area of our face and arms to maintain the required levels of vitamin D, and many people just not getting this. Something to be aware of. The second area I'd say, that we can be doing to look after mental health in these times is really figure out, if you didn't know already, what drains and what recharges your emotional batteries. Everyone's a bit different, and if you have more extroverted tendencies, for example, you might get recharged by doing more Zoom catch-ups with friends. If you're more introverted, then maybe it's carving out time alone to read a book. But get good at knowing when your emotional batteries are depleted and what it takes to recharge them. Then carve out specific times to do what you need to recharge, and support each other in your household to get this time, to make it happen. As the third thing, perhaps we can be doing during lockdown is being proactive about building positive moments and situations. And I like to think about it like three key initiative themes, if you like. Goals, joys, and memories. That's how I sort of put it. So, that's setting small goals each day. Two would be, creating small special moments to look forward to during lockdown. And the third would be creating big, unique, positive memories to be able to kind of look back on after lockdown, like planning and doing things that would have only happened because of lockdown, we wouldn't normally do.
Yeah. You mentioned the little circuit that you've set up in your house. Have you got examples of things that you're doing along the lines that you've just spoken?
Yeah. Well, like on the goals, for example, each night before going to bed, I write a list of things that I'd like to achieve the next day, even if they're just little things around the house, but it helps to create a sense of progress and achievement, and it makes things feel a little bit less like Groundhog Day, every day. For the fun and unique moments, one of the things my spouse and I do now is we do a date night once a week. We have an electric car. So we go to a different car park in our LGAs or in our LGA, that it's got a charging station, so there's several around, so we go to a different one. And we literally and figuratively, recharge our batteries.
Nice.
So we go for a walk around the car park. It's usually completely deserted these days, and we talk about big topics. We even nominate the topics we're going to talk about, but big ones related to us, our purpose in life, our future. So it's become a time that we really look forward to, and we really wouldn't want to miss it now. So.
Well, that's great. You've talked about some of the things we can be doing generally, regardless of our circumstances in life. What about some of the particular situations that people find themselves in? I know that as I've been speaking to people, there are all kinds of people in particular situations. Some of our church members, for instance, live alone, and I've spoken to many of them. I know from talking with them in these last couple of months that that comes with particular challenges, living alone during a time like this. How can someone living alone, for instance, look after their mental health during lockdown?
Yeah, living alone definitely can present some unique challenges. Actually, I attended a webinar actually just this week, on the effects of loneliness. So quite timely. The research, some of the research they're talking about coming out of that, shows that experiencing extended feelings of loneliness or physical isolation can, is definitely over longer term correlated with higher mortality rates and other health consequences. So it's definitely an important issue, and it's important for those living alone to not be socially distanced, even while physically distancing. The research also showed that there's not one answer for all, even in lockdown times. And for example, more social media or more Zoom is not the answer for all, is what they showed. In some cases, actually high use of Zoom was shown to increase feelings of disconnection for many, especially by older generations. So, once again, figure out what's right for you, but be proactive about that. Some ideas for those living alone might be, meeting one friend at a time for a walk within your LGA or 5 kilometre zone. Schedule a Zoom dinner party, actually have an actual event, and do that. If you enjoy cooking, then maybe experiment with a friend over FaceTime and cook the same dish together in your own kitchen. Just finding little things that you can do. But going back to the goals, joys, and memories theme, set some daily goals. 5,000 steps a day, for example, whether it's outside or inside the house. Do a masterclass online. Learn a new skill. Maybe something you've thought about doing but haven't, and maybe you wouldn't have got around to under normal circumstances. Yes, some members of my house are learning to paint, for example, and doing YouTube classes, and really, so
really,
lots of possibilities.
Lots of possibilities. We're only limited really by our imagination, I suppose. Another group of people I think of, and I walked with someone just this morning actually who's in this situation, is parents with kids, particularly parents with young kids. We've got church members in that situation, quite a number, and they are trying to juggle homeschooling, the demands of their own work. It is a pretty stressful time for them. What can you suggest for them in terms of looking after their mental health and even the mental health of their kids?
Yeah. Well, ironically, in this time of physical isolation, one of the biggest stresses for many in full households is actually not getting enough time alone. And that goes back to that emotional battery recharging, that we talked about before. My dog totally loves lockdown, having everyone home, but for everyone else, 24/7 contact can definitely cause additional stresses. So, for those in households with kids and others, take lockdown as an opportunity to actually have recharging discussions, with the whole family, explaining that each person has a different method of getting their energy back, and then go around the table and ask each person what they like to do that gives them energy. You can even start this with very young children, so book in time then for each person to get their recharge time. And, for some, they'll want to do things together, and that's great. So do that. For others in the family, they'll need time alone. So work together to protect that time and give each other that time. I think if we role model self-care, and show that it's actually okay to spend time apart and that each person's needs are important and maybe different, especially at times like this, then, we go a long way to actually, communicating what we need. But then for kids specifically, one thing we can do during the pandemic is to, I believe, is to tone down the anxiety creating behaviours and discussions and things. Children are very good at picking up on anxiety and can over-catastrophize signals that we put off. So try not to expose particularly young children, to continual mini traumas like, watching the COVID announcements or focusing the dinner conversations around the case and death count, every day, for example. It's fine for you, Jaime, of course, but perhaps less so for young kids. And of course, don't unrealistically create a false positive world either. Kids are smart, they see right through that, and they can, this can cause them even more stress. But just be honest, be conscious not to re-traumatize them every day, with things that are outside their control and outside your control. But also remember the three themes. This applies to kids at home too, and do things that you wouldn't normally do, and set up, things that everyone can look forward to. Create moments that the family can look back on, fondly years from now. I don't plan to cut Dad's hair on the weekend, or, I've seen people dress up in different costumes each week to take the bins out. A special time of the week you can look forward to. Ask everyone what's one thing they want to do when lockdown's over. Then actually spend time planning that and making a commitment to do it. Just gives people that mindset that we're not just sort of stuck here.
That's all really helpful. Thank you. A third group of people that I think of are our many young adults here at church, in our church family. Many of them would normally have active social lives, and usually serve actually in a variety of ways at church. That is all on hold at the moment. I think this lockdown is pretty hard for them too. Have you got any tips in particular for them?
Yeah, I speak to a lot of young people, especially those doing university or school studies at the moment. And they're doing it all online now. It's really tough, really tough. Not already doing it, things like having Zoom parties, catching up with friends one-on-one or in bigger groups on Zoom, doing walks with one other person at a time within your allowable travel range, but, making sure you see a lot of different people. If you're still living at home, then, get involved in the discussions we talked about before, figure out what you need to keep re-energizing. Importantly, I've seen for young people, I would say, don't bottle it up. Find an outlet to have the discussions about how you're feeling and how things are impacting you. A friend, a relative, a pastor, counselor, really important to be talking.
Rob, one of the things that I've gleaned from talking with people in recent weeks, and it's certainly been my own experience as well, is the sense of disappointment that many people have experienced with this extended lockdown. We've seen people who've had to cancel holidays, job opportunities have been shelved, plans to see family or friends abandoned, celebrating special occasions are postponed. The list goes on. And I know from myself, we had what I considered important things planned at church, which we've had to shelve. And I've felt the disappointment of that. A lot of people are dealing with disappointment. And I suppose with disappointment can come an array of responses, emotions, frustration or sadness or bitterness even. How can we deal with the disappointment and those related emotions due to this lockdown?
Yeah, and similar, I think we've all had our share of disappointments during all this. I've one of my sons turned 18 during lockdown, and the other one turned 21. So it was very disappointing for both of them not to be able to celebrate properly with friends. But look, one thing I think we can do is look for ways to turn that disappointment of what you missed into something, something that becomes a special moment, one of these special moments I talked about. Not always possible, but sometimes it is. And for example, I completed my PhD last year during lockdown, and because of COVID, I wasn't able to attend a graduation ceremony. So we decided we'd hold a graduation ceremony at home. And instead of academic gowns and caps, we wore dressing gowns and baseball caps. And one of my sons gave the vice chancellor's address. The other one was the student valedictorian and gave an address. My spouse presented me as the candidate to the vice chancellor, and then I gave a speech.
And you took photos, video. This is captured for posterity.
We absolutely did, actually, videos and photos. In fact, it's the photo that I've got on my desk. It's now one of the most sort of special things, and that was the point. It sort of turned what started as a big disappointment. We thought, okay, let's make this a little bit of fun, try and turn it around, and it was. But it actually then became probably one of the most meaningful, moments. It certainly was the most meaningful graduation I could ever kind of wish for, with those that I love, that made an effort, made it special. And now I treasure that more than I possibly would have any formal, stuffy graduation ceremony. And it really was a surprise. But you can do that if you make that little effort. So I'd say another lever, to maybe address disappointment is to care for our spiritual health too. We as Christians, we have the wonderful advantage of being able to reframe our kind of current situation, grounded in the truths of our faith and in the context of God's bigger purpose and plan, even though the specific mechanisms of that plan may not always be immediately obvious. But, whether or not the PM says we're in a COVID race, we know that as Christians, we're definitely in a race of spiritual significance. And I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus.
Yes. Paul's great words.
Yeah. I mean, the current times, are not a halftime break in that race, right? We're not told to, okay, have a sit on the sideline,
Absolutely.
No, the race goes on, Maybe the track conditions have changed a bit, fine. But it's important, I think, to remind each other of this and discuss together how we're still straining towards that goal, and how God is working through all of this. And in light of that type of reflection, I think earlier disappointments tend to fade quite a bit, certainly do for me.
I'm glad you mentioned our spiritual health. That's, of course, an important part of our conversation. In the second part of our conversation, we're going to drill down a little bit more into, given the importance of caring for our mental health, what can we also do to be caring for our spiritual health? Rob, a passage that we're all very familiar with here at St. Phil's is Romans 12:11. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervour serving the Lord. That, of course, is about the importance of cultivating a vibrant, ongoing spiritual life. And as important as it is in this time to be looking after our mental health, we also do want to be looking after our spiritual health. But I think that's tough. I think that's difficult. Keeping our spiritual fervour, maintaining our spiritual health. In a time like this, there are certain challenges. We can't, for instance, gather at church or in our small groups. We can't praise and worship in the ways that we are used to. It's possible even for some people that this pandemic maybe raises existential questions that make us question God's goodness or his sovereignty. So in this next part of the conversation, I'm wondering if we can discuss and if you can draw out for us any practices, exercises, attitudes, ways of thinking perhaps that might help us care for our spiritual health during lockdown.
Sure, and I'm sure you've got some great ideas too, so maybe we can bounce it around. But it's definitely a tough time for churches for sure. I certainly can't recall any time in my life where things have been so impacted like this. But perhaps I can talk about it in terms of what we can do for ourselves spiritually, and also what we can do for those around us, if that's okay. Because I think that's an important part of actually getting that kind of spiritual care. And I'd go back to the three initiative themes that we talked about last time. For spiritual life too. That's goals, joy, and memories. And goals from a spiritual sense could be about keeping keeping those important spiritual disciplines and routines that we are always aware that we'd like to do, but setting a specific time in the day to pray, keeping up with a growth group or Bible study. And importantly, I'd actually encourage people as well to attend, when attending online church, as much as possible, try to do it live too. I think, rather than watch it later. I mean, obviously, if you can't make it live, better to watch it later. But I really believe there's power in kind of connecting with the live delivery along with the rest of the church, even if that's a pre-recorded, but doing it together and seeing it for the first time while it's happening. I think there's a sense of connection that comes even when we can't see others, which is important.
And that's helpful. I mean, we know having routines during lockdown, which, every day can seem like Groundhog Day, having a distinct routine. It comes around Sunday. Sunday's the day we usually go to church. So Sunday's the day we sit down and do church online. Keeping up that routine can be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Other personal goals, maybe doing something like, using the next month of lockdown to read one chapter of Proverbs a day, for example. And then you've got both the goals as well as the spiritual refreshment.
Yep.
Our church set a goal of reading the New Testament right through, cover to cover, by mid-December. And it wasn't actually intended as a lockdown goal, but it just might be one now, but it actually, once again, is sort of that keeps the discipline, but as well as keeps the feeding as well spiritually.
One thing you said in our earlier conversation, when you quoted Paul about, running the race, which is the Christian life, that this momentary interruption to our lives we call lockdown doesn't mean it has to interrupt our Christian life, our race in the Christian life. That all the things we are used to doing regularly with regularity, our Bible reading, our prayer, these are as vital as ever to keep up. That we're not on the sidelines. We don't kind of park our Christian life for the time being, but it's important to we've talked about disciplines in the Christian life. It's important, isn't it, to keep up those disciplines in the Christian life?
Definitely, and perhaps even more than ever, with the opportunity of things like lockdown, give us a chance to do things that that we wouldn't have normally done, that actually help even more. They've broken our normal routine, so let's use that as an opportunity to grasp that and do things that we wouldn't have perhaps done spiritually. Create those special moments too. Like maybe when you go on a bushwalk, go on a bushwalk and pray. Connect with God that way if you hadn't already done it.
Thankfully, one of the things we are still able to do is exercise with someone, and so given that a lot of our perhaps Christian interaction is online, be that small group or for us Sunday Live on a Sunday or our Tuesday prayer meetings online, there is the opportunity actually to call a Christian brother or sister and organise to go for a walk or to go for a run around the Oval. And in that context, be intentional in asking each other, how are you going with your race, with your walk with the Lord? That opportunity exists, and certainly I've been trying to do that, and I know others have been as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important, in these times to look out for each other spiritually too, and not just those in our house, but the church more broadly. I was actually surprised. I was talking with our minister, with my minister, sorry, the other day, and he mentioned that he was aware of 12 new people that had joined the church, had identified as saying, we go to this church, had joined since lockdown sort of started, that nobody's actually ever met, and, I think could be opportunities there to reach out to people, just connect, say hi, get to know people, even people you do know but don't know well. Jump on the church, contact list and connect with a couple of people and chat. So I think it is important we keep reaching out.
I think of something like Bible reading. This is a time, I think, where the Psalms come into their own. You mentioned Proverbs before, full of wonderful, godly, practical wisdom. The Psalms, being the songbook of the Bible, they give us words to speak to God. And given the variety of emotions we experience during lockdown, the Psalms is a great place to go, because reflected there in all of the Psalms are the full spread of human emotions. And many of them are prayers talking out loud to God. Just this morning, I think I mentioned before, I was walking with someone and they were talking about lament. And, you know, there are Psalms of lament that kind of cry out to God. Why are things like this? And I know from my own experience and others that Psalms of lament have provided the words for them to articulate to God how they're feeling.
Mm. I actually had a suggestion from somebody yesterday in our community group Bible study. Said, what about actually writing a psalm yourself? I thought that's a nice idea, you know, and particularly in this time when once again things have changed. You know, we're all, as you said, disappointments, and you know, things are difficult, really, really difficult. Thinking back to, you know, most of the Psalms written by David in times when things were really tough, you know.
Yep.
How about we have a crack at doing our own, you know?
Yeah. I did that. I did that last year, actually.
Did you really?
Yeah. In my men's small group, we decided to look at some of the Psalms of lament, and we set the challenge to try to write a Psalm of lament. And a few of us did. I did. It was good. I found it super helpful. I go back to it now, and I think it was probably overly melodramatic, but it was cathartic at the time, you know.
Yeah. Well, this would certainly seem to be the times, right? So
yeah. One of the things I think I've also found that can help in terms of spiritual care is probably releasing ourselves of some expectations. I think particularly around small group. My own experience has been that trying to do a fully orbed Bible study over an hour and a half on Zoom is very difficult. And this time around, we've lowered our expectations. I know in our group, we go for probably 40 to 45 minutes, and we have someone just share basically a devotional message from a part of the scriptures that they've been reflecting on, and they might ask a question or two, and we pray about it. And in that context, we catch up and pray for each other, and then we go on our way. Now that's about half the time that we would normally spend when we're in person. So perhaps there are ways that people can just kind of reduce the expectations they have of themselves in terms of small group, or, you know, volume of Bible reading or length of prayer. Just realizing that this is a time that is difficult to do anything, particularly on a screen, for any sustained period.
I think that's really wise, yeah. And certainly for those of us that spend a lot of time on Zoom, Zoom fatigue is real, you know, and yeah, that's sort of smart. The other thing I was thinking too is the actually having somebody, identifying somebody that you can actually specifically identify to be kind of a support, you know, for you during this time, almost like a, you know, accountability or support partner. You know, it actually reminded me when I was thinking about that, of something that happened at the Olympics recently. You know, I'm sure you watched a bit of that, Jamie.
Didn't we all?
Did you see the Aussies in the decathlon? Ash Maloney and Cedric Dubler. Familiar with that sort of situation? Yeah. But for those that are not, you know, it's Maloney was in a bronze medal place going into the final of the 10 events of the decathlon. It was the 1500 meters, and he had some hot competition though for the bronze, particularly from two people that had better 1500 meter times than he did. So it was not looking certain for sure. But Dubler, who was, you know, out of medal contention by this stage, he decided to sacrifice his race to act as a support for Maloney, and he paced Maloney for the first 3 laps, and in the process sort of burned himself out. But as Maloney passed him for the final kind of lap, he was literally like screaming at him to push himself to go, you know, and Maloney credits him, you know, him doing that for actually getting the bronze, for actually having that last kind of push. And it actually reminded me a lot of a sermon you once gave using a similar image from the Tour de France bike race, with the crowd running alongside the races, but it was a great reminder to me that sometimes, we need to be the ones that reach out and help and think, how can we actually spur, another on for this race? But sometimes, we're the one that needs to accept the help and actually recognize that we actually may not make that next step alone. So reach out and take that boy up. But if we can be proactive about connecting with each other in that way and for that purpose, then perhaps we can all get through this in a little bit more effectively.
It's really helpful, I think, finishing with that illustration. It's a very tangible illustration, isn't it? We want to be the person running alongside someone else, kind of yelling in their ear, come on, keep going, you can do it. But at the same time, we're also the person running the race, and we need someone to be running alongside us, yelling that in our ear as well. We'll find ourselves in both those situations in the Christian life. Rob, it really has been terrific to talk about some really important issues today. I very much appreciate your insights. I'm sure people who are watching this have as well. I think they've been really helpful. Just one last question. If there is anyone watching who isn't managing so well during this lockdown, particularly with the news today that it's going to be extended, and who knows how long it's going to go for, perhaps they're not going so well with their spiritual health or their mental health, what would you suggest they do?
Well, on the spiritual, one first, I would definitely say, if anyone's struggling or looking for spiritual health, ideas, to, in the first instance, definitely to reach out to one of the church leaders, and so for your church, that, for you to Glenn, Brian, or Tom, For mental health support, talking with a counsellor or a clinical psychologist would be recommended as the next level. And if you want to access the Medicare rebate on that, then start with a visit to your GP for a referral. One thing that's actually come out of the COVID situation here is that the government has increased the allowable psychologist visits under Medicare from 10 to 20.
Oh, okay.
So in recognition that people are going to need more support. So avail yourself.
I didn't know that. Thanks for letting us know.
Yeah. You can also call Anglican's counselling service if you want to talk specifically to a Christian counsellor.
Yep.
Or if you or someone really needs to talk to somebody more immediately, then you can call Lifeline 24 hours a day.
Yep.
That's
very good, very helpful.
To be aware of.
Well, Rob, as I said, it's been great to discuss these things today. I really appreciate your time and your insights. God bless. Thanks.
Thanks for making it happen, Jamie. And if I can encourage you, keep up the good work.